Touchdown, Michigan!
And it's a touchdown for Vincent Smith.
And there he goes! Charles Woodson down the sideline! 35-40, he's in midfield, and they'll never catch him. Denard Robinson, shoelaces flopping in the wind.
Everyone understanding that this isn't about a coach, this isn't about a single player. It's about Michigan. We look at the film, and the good news is we got 11 more guaranteed opportunities to play Michigan football.
Welcome to Varsity Blue, Week 2. Adam Brewster, Kevin Twill back with us from Africa, and Sam Dodge with us once again. Guys, Brady Hoke said it in his press conference today. That was the opening clip. The good news is we are guaranteed 11 more games in which we get to play Michigan football. About the best takeaway, I think, from Saturday's whomping against Alabama. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, the Cowboys Classic definitely was not an example for the national audience of what Michigan football can do. So hopefully we have 11 more chances to show what we can do.
Well, Alabama does this to so many teams, and unfortunately it had to happen to the Michigan Wolverines on Saturday.
It certainly did. Dallas was a fun place. I think we all agreed that we had a good time. The three of us were each down there. Kevin and I got to see the Stanley Cup out on the town on Friday night. You got to meet Brent Musburger.
Childhood idol.
So, positive takeaways from all of us. The game, it started with a fun 3-and-out, and then things got going downhill really, really quickly. Kevin, take us through the highlights.
Well, absolutely, it was a bowling atmosphere down in Dallas, and we'll get it started with Fowler for 16 yards in the gaping Michigan defense. We'd see that a lot. And then here's A.J. McCarron. He gets a little play action and beats the backup Courtney Avery, cornerback here, for a long 51-yard touchdown to DeAndre White. The Michigan secondary really wasn't after the same after Blake Hownis got hurt on special teams. Now here Michigan trying to get on track their running game. Both Vincent Smith and Thomas Rawls got carries, and both were ineffective, as we'll see here. Michigan tried to establish the run early but was unsuccessful most of the time, forcing Denard into some long passing situations. And here you see Rory Roundtree gets out physical, gets pushed off the ball, and he's not there for the reception. It ends up getting intercepted by D. Milner, who would take the ball down inside the Michigan 20 and put Michigan in a bad spot, already down 14-0. And now here's Eddie Lacy. He'll take it in from 9 yards out. The blowout commences here, 21-0, and it's only the first quarter. Michigan really trying to get back on track. But here they're backed up again into their own end zone, and Denard trying to get out of it with his arm. Did not see the linebacker there, C.J. Mosley, and he would take it in easily to the house. That would be 31-0. Denard really was confused there, real shaken up. But here, doing what he does best most of the time with the arm, throwing a great deep ball here to Jeremy Gallen, who got behind the Alabama secondary. He'd be taken down to the 1-yard line. And then after a delay of 12 men on the field penalty, which we'll see which happened in between this play and the next play, here from 6 yards out, Denard finishing himself. This was probably when we saw Denard get some running done, but we really didn't see too much Denard. He got the touchdown there, getting Michigan on the board 31-7. And then here, second half coverage, Denard trying to get the first down on 4th and 3, only got 2 there. He got rattled up. It might have been his wrist, hip. Brady Hoke said it was his back. But then he would get back in on the next possession. And here's Vincent Smith finding the edge for the one time in the game. The Alabama defense was definitely too fast for him. And then Denard, to his former backup, Devin Gardner, for the touchdown. That would make it 31-14. And Michigan maybe had a chance, but then it was too much Alabama. Here we see T.J. Yeldon, who could be the heir apparent to Trent Richardson. He played extremely well against the Michigan defense, absolutely dicing him up there for a 40-yard game. And then here, he'll punch it in for the score. That'll be the end of the scoring for Alabama. It was a pummeling, 41-14. Michigan never really in the game, Adam.
Michigan never really found themselves in it, and when you go down to Alabama by 21 in the first quarter, yeah, there might be a lot of time left, They didn't allow a lot of points at all last year. 14 was the most they allowed to any SEC opponent. Michigan did manage to put up that amount against them. We'll take a look at the numbers from the game. Total yards, Bama absolutely dominating Michigan, 431 to 269, 20 first downs to 11 for Michigan. And Michigan just really struggled to get first downs. And even if they did get one, they were never really sustaining drives, Sam. Denard Robinson really, really struggled in this one. 11 of 26. Looked about as uncomfortable as he'd looked in a game in a while. McCarron doing basically what he does. Not necessarily winning the game for Alabama, but not making the mistakes to allow them to lose the game either. So we'll start with the fact that all summer we heard, this is Michigan, this is why you come to Michigan, to play teams like Alabama. How deflating was it to see Michigan come out and really in the first quarter be taken out of the game after having all summer to prepare?
Well, it's obviously deflating because as you said, you practice all summer for this. There was so much anticipation for this game over the last 3 years. And then you really play a team like Alabama, and you don't realize that this is almost a semi-professional team that you're playing, and that you have to be on a completely different physical level. Last year was really nice, beating Virginia Tech in the Sugar Bowl, beating Ohio State, beating Notre Dame. Those were all nice things, but this is a completely different level of football, and Michigan is probably 2 or 3 years away from being competitive.
Yeah, it was almost like Brady Oak had a contingency plan in place in case they were blown out early, because after the first quarter, really went back to a lot of bad habits that Michigan's been doing for the last 2 years. Denard throwing interceptions, Vincent Smith not really being able to get going. And after that, it was just Alabama pounding that ball on that young defensive line of Michigan, and they really didn't have a shot.
We'll
Sorry.
We'll start with Denard.
Yeah.
And this was, from what I saw, and I was sitting in the stands and talking to those who I was sitting with, it seemed to be the most uncomfortable he's looked in a game in a very long time. He seemed to be having that tunnel vision that he used to have back in the early days of his playing career, where he says, this play's going to Devin, I'm going to lock in on Devin, or I'm going to lock in on Roy, and no matter if they're covered or not, I'm throwing the ball to them. It was weird to see. It was almost a regression, wasn't it, Sam?
Yeah, it was, and I think that was, you have to really look at this Alabama defense and realize they've throttled guys like Colt McCoy in the past, Tyler Wilson of Arkansas in the past, guys like Tim Tebow. So this isn't unusual for Alabama to do this. I think it's more how physical they were rather than Denard, being more uncomfortable than he's ever been on his own. But it was really surprising. He didn't get a lot of help either from his receivers.
But for a former Big Ten Offensive Player of the Year, 3-year starter, he looked extremely skittish. And there was no reason to really, you don't have to start out that way. You can play with them, and it didn't look like he had that mindset that he wanted to compete at Alabama's level, and that really hurt them early on.
Well, I think there were some drops early on as well from guys like Devin Gardner, who wasn't running the best routes, and Roy Roundtree, who wasn't running the best routes. That didn't really help, but you're right. He looked skittish from the early going.
It did, and he didn't even want to run the ball much. Al Borges and Brady Hoke saying Alabama's linebackers and safeties did things that prevented Denard from running, and I think that was just doing their job. Was really what prevented Denard from running. The running game outside of Denard, it looked miserable. 69 rushing yards from a team that moved the ball well on the ground against everyone except Michigan State last year. It was as if they couldn't get anything going quickly, Kevin. What was wrong with that?
Well, it was Vincent Smith. They've tried Vincent Smith as the key back. Michigan State last year didn't work. This game did not work. He is not big enough to compete with those SEC linebackers, SEC defensive ends, who are almost as quick as him.
Well, I think you have to also say the offensive line. Elliott Mueller and Ricky Barnum are not at the same level as those SEC linemen, and that's why Michigan was dominated on the front line.
And Michigan's defense really looked overmatched on all fronts. The defensive line looked like they were just getting pummeled. Not much pressure at all on A.J. McCarron, having trouble stopping the run. But quickly, Sam, a lot of broken tackles by Alabama. It looked like it was a Greg Robinson, not Greg Madison defense.
This is about as bad as Michigan's tackled since Wisconsin 2010. Just awful, awful tackling. And probably the most deflating thing about the game is not that Alabama was just more physically capable than Michigan, but that Michigan wasn't as fundamentally sound as they were last year. And that really was emphasized throughout the entire game defensively, with even guys like Jordan Kovacs missing tackles.
It was frustrating to watch. And Brady Hoke saying today, someone asked him, well, Coach, how are you going to fix the broken tackles? And he said, Well, basically, the only way I know how to fix something is to work on it more. So he's acknowledged that the NCAA has some new restrictions on how much tackling you can actually do in practice, but he basically said, we're going to go out there and we're going to tackle in practice. That's the only way I know how to get better. Some other things that we need to look at in this game, Devin Gardner making the switch to wide receiver. Brady Hoke today talking about that in press conference, how Devin Gardner did in his debut and what he expects from Devin in the future.
I would say he's a wide receiver first, and then a quarterback depending on where you're at in the game or the week. Well, I think you're right. I think a couple things. I think we're very comfortable and very confident in Devin at wide receiver, and I know Denard is. And I think as he continues to play more, continues, and especially at game level, game speed, and you try and do that every day in practice, but I think, he learned a little bit more about playing wide receiver.
So Sam, basically, Brady saying Devin's going to get better, but he's a wide receiver first, except for certain situations. Basically kind of what we touched on last week.
Well, yes, but I think if you're going to take any kind of bright spot out of this game, and Devin is not the most chiseled or beveled on all sides kind of receiver, but you're going to put him out there and he's going to make plays. When he learns how to run routes correctly, which he didn't in this game, he still made that big 44-yard touchdown. So I think Devin is a bright spot in the future for the Wolverines.
And, of course, we would be remiss if we weren't talking about some of the injuries. Lawan got banged up. Brady Hoke said it was more of a bruise. Brandon Moore might be out a week or so. They said an MCL issue. The big loss, Blake Countess tearing his ACL. Michigan making it official today. Here's Brady Hoke talking about Countess and that injury.
Blake has always been a first gunner. Well, we try and only put, guys who are going to play significant time on two teams, and the rationale is it's 1/3 of the football game. And you better have, guys who are capable and guys you think are your best players, And so the rationale is you got to win the kicking game also.
Kevin, Brady Hoke standing by his decision, saying, look, Blake was my gunner last year. He's the best guy who's going to be out there. We want to keep our best guys on the field as much as you can. But when you see a guy tear his ACL on a punt return in the first 5 minutes of the season, a guy who was, we talked about how deep this secondary was. Well, he was a key part of that depth, and now it doesn't seem as deep anymore. Did he belong in that gunner spot?
Yes, I think absolutely. If you're going to be on special teams, you're going to continue on special teams. If he's the best gunner you have to play him. You look at A.J. McCarron on the other side. He's there holding field goals for Alabama. You can't expect somebody to get hurt. You can't keep him in. You can't take him out just in case he might get hurt. Same thing, Denard. He needs to run the ball. You can't expect that. Oh, we're not going to run it in case he gets hurt. You got to play. You stick with your guns, and I appreciate Brady Hoke staying with that in the press conference today.
And it was acknowledged. People kind of saying, well, but Brady Hoke stood his ground and said, no, that was my guy. That was my gunner, and Courtney's going to do a fine job. Coming back after this, take a look at how the rest of the Big Ten did in their opening games. This is Varsity Blue. Welcome back to Varsity Blue. Adam Brewster, Kevin Twill, Sam Dodge with you. Rest of the Big Ten faring a little better than Michigan did this weekend. The heavyweights doing well. Wisconsin, Ohio State, Michigan State, all taking care of business. Not necessarily in the most thrilling or convincing fashion. Ohio State absolutely dominated Miami of Ohio. Indiana got the win. Michigan State, Northwestern, in a kind of controversial win, took down Syracuse in the Carrier Dome. The only other Big Ten school to not win this weekend, Penn State falls to Ohio in a game that Sam, you said you think Ohio's a really good mid-major, but I think a lot of people expected Penn State to come out fired up, and maybe that talent depth is a concern. But we want to start with Michigan State. Michigan's, one of their biggest rivals, and probably their biggest rival within the division in terms of competing for the division title. Nebraska also in there. They opened up against Boise State. Sam, Le'Veon Bell looked very, very good for Michigan State this past weekend.
Yes, he did. He had 44 carries, he had 6 receptions, he had over 200 total yards of offense, more than Boise State had as an entire team. So you've got the great defense that Michigan State has, and you got Le'Veon Bell. He looked like an Alabama running back out there. You should be frightened if you're the Big Ten looking at a guy like Bell in the future.
And now you kind of know why maybe Edwin Baker left early. For as good as Bell looked, Kevin, Andrew Maxwell, another guy taking over a starting job, struggled mightily in that game. Threw 3 interceptions, 1 down on the goal line. Maybe not necessarily his fault, all of them, but still not the most impressive outing if you're a Michigan State fan.
Not impressive at all for Andrew Maxwell. But I think Michigan State and Coach D'Antoni have something they can work with, because they have a great defense and a great running game now with Le'Veon Bell. So if Maxwell can just be a game manager and not make these mistakes that were killer in the first half, especially against Boise State, I think Michigan State has a chance to be a top 10 team all year.
I wouldn't overwork Bell, though. You can't give him 50 touches a game and expect him to be healthy.
He really did carry the workload this past weekend for Michigan State. And, I mean, you got to say, if he didn't, they might not have won that game. 17-13, squeaking one out against Boise, who also had a first-year quarterback. A lot of transitions for the Broncos as well. I think people expected Michigan State to handle them a lot easier than they did, and maybe that just says something about Boise and the job that they did. Wisconsin, fellas, getting things done against Northern Iowa, but it came down to the wire, 26-21. But this is kind of a game where Wisconsin was doing well. They were up 26-7 with 12:31 to go in the game, and then Northern Iowa banging in a couple touchdowns there, making it look maybe a little closer than it did. Danny O'Brien, Kevin, looked fairly impressive, 19 of 23 for 219 yards in his debut.
O'Brien, Russell Wilson was a lot to lose, but Wisconsin has had success with these first-year quarterbacks, and O'Brien might be the next one. Like Andrew Maxwell at Michigan State, he probably just needs to be more of a game manager with the great Monty Ball back there in the backfield. But Wisconsin, it looks like they're a little more shallow as far as talent goes compared to the last couple of years, Sam.
They are a little underwhelming in terms of, Monty Ball's obviously this great talent. James White is really good, but their offensive line is not quite on the level they were last year. The defense was solid enough. Danny O'Brien was solid enough, but that kind of underwhelming offensive line may submarine them for the rest of the year.
And Monty Ball starts off his Heisman campaign, 32 carries, 120 yards, and a touchdown. Not stellar numbers against a Northern Iowa team who, coming in just being a mid-wager, going into Camp Randall, giving Wisconsin some fits. A team that absolutely steamrolled their MAC opponent this week, the Ohio State Buckeyes. They may not be able to win a division title, but folks, they're coming, and they are coming strong. Braxton Miller fitting into that Urban Meyer offense very well. 56-10, Buckeyes roll over the Redhawks. Impressions, Kevin?
Braxton Miller. He seems to be the perfect quarterback for the Urban Meyer system, and he can really lead the way for Ohio State. Maybe they're postseason ineligible, but they're going to give all the teams in the Big Ten they play a ton of fits all year with that speed they have on the offense.
Well, being a Michigan show, I'd be remiss to not point out some of the weaknesses I saw in Ohio State. Miami, Ohio is a good quarterback, Taylor Dystert, and they say he's the next Ben Roethlisberger for that school. He found several holes deep in that Ohio State secondary, and if those Miami wide receivers played a little bit better, he could have had 400 yards passing in that game. So Ohio State, very good, but they've got a lot of weaknesses that another team can maybe exploit.
I think 56-10 sits fairly well in Columbus right now, but
does.
Sam Dodge always there to point out the things that could be improved upon. Coming back, we'll take a look at the future of Michigan. Recruiting's been going very well for Michigan, and we look at it early on because this class is nearly full, so we'll take a look at some of the guys on the offensive side of the ball who could maybe help Michigan compete with the likes of Alabama in a couple of years. We'll be right back after this.
And your mother was begging for us to stop.
Oh, this commercial's still running.
Hey guys, how's it going? Are you ready for the show?
Of course I am, you knucklehead. Who do you think I am? I'm Sir Charles Barkley.
I don't know. Look at yourself before you pass judgment. Okay.
David, I was promised 8 pounds of turkey in exchange for appearing on Varsity Blue. Where is my turkey? That is my question.
But have you guys even thought about if Trotch to get fired or not this year?
What are you saying? Is it true? Sure. Indeed. Yes. 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 I mean it this time.
No, David, I will not answer your question until you give me the turkey that I was promised in exchange for appearing on the show. I cannot think until I get my turkey. We are
Varsity
Blues.
If I had one word to describe Varsity Blue, it would definitely not be terrible, you knucklehead. Alexander Prasad.
Welcome back to Varsity Blue. Adam Brewster, Kevin Twill, Sam Dodge with you once again. We'll take a look, and we were a little doom and gloom the first part of the episode, but it's something that had been going very well, and of course, what this game may have a big impact on, filling out the rest of Michigan's 2013 recruiting class. Obviously, none of these guys are inked until February. Coaches can't talk about them on the record and whatnot, but we can still talk about them and have a little fun. Shane Morris, really the star of the class. He has been. We'll look at some of the offensive weapons first who Michigan's going after. Morris, the quarterback from De La Salle. Laquan Treadwell and Derek Green, it should be noted, are targets at this point. They have not verbally committed to Michigan, so we'll talk about the odds maybe of them coming here. Those are some of the other big playmakers who could round out this class, filling out the final few spots. Sam, Shane Morris, a big thing besides his skill has been his impact on recruiting other players himself. Can you talk about how important that is when you've got a quarterback who's very highly touted, such as himself, going out and campaigning to join him?
It's extremely important. If you talk to the recruits, they're always talking about how Shane Morris is on them, recruiting them, always sending tweets, always sending messages to them. And it gets them excited to be a part of this recruiting class. You can look at this line, and guys like Kyle Bosch and Logan Tully-Tillman, they got connected with Michigan through guys like Shane Morris. He's pretty much the lead recruiter for Michigan outside of the coaches, and that's huge for this recruiting class.
If you look at NCAA regulations and rules, the actual coaches can only have limited contact. And then when you have a great player, a great leader already like Shane Morris, who can go ahead and talk whenever he wants to these guys, it really helps out a lot.
It certainly does. And Sam, you were at the Ann Arbor Pioneer De La Salle game last Friday night. Thoughts on Shane Morris in game action?
In game action, he started off very slowly. In the first quarter, he was 1 for 7, but you can kind of expect sometimes to be a little underwhelmed by the hype machine that Shane Morris creates. But he reminds me a lot like a left-handed Drew Henson. He has a very strong arm. He has very good mobility and athleticism, and he's not afraid to show off his arm. So he was very impressive in the final 3 quarters of that game.
Odds of getting the other two guys, do you think? Getting Treadwell and getting Derek Green?
I think Derek Green is going to be a little tricky because he's been visiting Auburn a lot more recently. However, Laquan Treadwell, you go back to the Shane Morris recruiting factor. Treadwell, Morris are best of friends. They are always here. Laquan Treadwell has visited Michigan 7 times this summer, so he is here all the time. I think Treadwell is not going to be a Jordan Diamond. He's not going to string out the entire process till the end and pick someone else. I think he's going to string out, enjoy his time, and pick Michigan.
Kevin, what do you think about getting one of those other two guys?
I think Treadwell we have a better chance with because he can see himself making an instant impact on wide receiver because there's very little depth for Michigan right now.
I very agree. Michigan's running back depth is going to be a little loaded.
That is true. Loading up, though, on the offensive line, guys, it's a position that has become it went through a period there during the Rich Rod era where it kind of thinned out and got a little weak. Beefed it up a little bit in this 2012 class, the freshmen now. But the 2013 offensive line class, they have been loading up on numbers, Kevin, and even just picking 3 of these guys was tough to put on one graphic.
Yeah, absolutely. You have a good array of what high school offensive linemen really are. You have the big guys that are really physically ready to play, like Kyle Bosch at 6'5", 311. And then you have some smaller, better athletes, but really need to put on that weight for college, like Dawson, the left guard. I think both of them are big parts of the class, as well as Logan Tully-Tillman, who is probably the best rated offensive lineman we have coming in. But I think creating that depth is really going to be big.
Well, you really look at these guys, and you're right. They all fill a role. Kyle Bosch is a big 6'5", 311 drive blocker. He's like Kyle Kalis of this class. He's going to grab onto his defender and drive them into the ground. Then you got Dawson, who's moved up incredibly in the Rivals rankings with his athleticism and how he's always in front of the lineman. He may get overpowered sometimes, but the weight gains they'll make under Brady Hoke and Aaron Wellman will fix that. every lineman in this class fills a role, and that's improving depth in the near future for the Michigan Wolverines.
It's something to see because Michigan really, the offensive line struggled against the likes of Alabama because they've been getting those elite defensive linemen coming out of college. It was not a rebuilding year we see for Nick Saban. It was a reloading year, and it was they reloaded very, very well. But Michigan now starting to get into that mindset of building depth at all of these positions. And Brady Hoke and his staff, credit them, they've done a terrific job since they've come in at really building the fundamental part of this team in the trenches. Something they stressed from day one at Brady Hoke's press conference. Turning our heads to next week, something more immediate than guys who will be seeing the field, maybe not for 2 years. Michigan plays Air Force next Saturday. Brady Hoke said today in his press conference, you can't let a team beat you twice. Basically saying, look, Bama beat us. It's over. It's in the past. All we can do is learn from it, but we can't let them beat us twice. Any real chance at a hangover during this weekend, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Alabama is such a physical team that some of those guys like Denard and Taylor Lewan, they might be beat up for this Air Force game, and that might make an impact, especially in the beginning. And that's why it's going to be so important for Michigan to get out early to a good start. Denard, get some big runs early on, and really show what this Michigan team was supposed to be after really a dud in the first week.
I think it would be very foolish for Michigan to underestimate this Air Force team. They have been very strong over the years. They run not only the triple option offense, but a spread offense in there. They're probably the most diverse offense you see in the nation, and they can jump on Michigan. Michigan has to come out and play even with Air Force for the initial punch of the game, and then I think they're probably going to run away with it.
It'll be an interesting game to see. They played Idaho State last week. You saw some numbers up there. Taking care of business, though, 49-21, not really struggling at all with Idaho State. 626 yards of offense for the Falcons last week, led by Cody Getz, who had 218 yards, averaged almost 13 yards a carry, a long of 63. Sam, we saw Michigan get run all over this week, and I know that Bama came at him with guys like Yeldon and with Lacey, a few different guys, D. Hart even thrown in the mix. They're coming at you with one guy, and they're going to say, stop him. Can Michigan?
Yes, they absolutely can. If you really watch the game, it was mostly a physical mismatch for Michigan. They were hitting the right gaps. They were using the right strategy. They just didn't have the personnel to take on the Alabama Crimson Tide. Brady Hoke has experience with Air Force when he was at San Diego State, and he dominated them. I think he knows how to coach this team. I think Michigan stops them after initial struggles with the offense.
Yeah, as much as Michigan was overmatched against Alabama, I think Air Force is going to be overmatched here, and I don't see a running game like they had in Week 1 against Idaho State against the Michigan Wolverines in the Big House.
On the defensive side of the ball for Air Force, they allowed 431 yards of offense, including 365 through the air. Bode well a little bit, maybe get Denard his confidence back and some of those wide receivers out there catching balls and whatnot. Could that be a nice confidence boost for them, Sam, on the offensive side?
Absolutely. Denard needs to get into a rhythm with his short and intermediate passing game and then get a couple runs on the ground. That's when he's in his best rhythm. That's when he can start hitting the longer passes. And I think Air Force is probably the perfect medicine because their defense is atrocious.
And Kevin, Fitz Toussaint and Frank Clark will play this week. Fitz comes back. I think it turned out to be a bigger issue than everyone expected it to be last week. What are you looking for from Fitz in Week 2?
People were thinking, oh, Thomas Rawls, oh, Vincent Smith, they can fill in, be Fitz Toussaint, but they're not Fitz Toussaint, a 1,000-yard rusher. He's going to be the key in what everyone's going to be talking about all week because he's going to have a great game against Air Force.
All right, fellas, we got about under a minute to go. Sam, key to the game and then a prediction.
The key to the game is Michigan just holding on right away at the beginning of the game and taking Air Force's initial punch and then driving them into the ground for the rest of the game. Michigan wins 41-17.
I think Fitz Toussaint's going to have a huge game, and I don't even think their Air Force's offense is going to be able to put that many points. I'd say 31-7 Michigan.
We see 31-7 Michigan. Kind of an opposite of what we saw this week, what you guys said about the physical mismatch being a difference. Some holes certainly in that Air Force lineup. It's going to be tough to stop Getz, and Dietz isn't a bad quarterback. He's accurate. Only threw the ball 11 times last week, but was 8 for 11. I think Michigan wins 31-10. We'll see you next week, hopefully talking about a Michigan win over Air Force, and they'll be back to 500.